We're just stepping back a little bit just to clarify. I think if you watch the videos and you pay attention last class, things are quite clear, but we're just going to wrap up enzymes, ATP, metabolism. I'm going to show you thyroxine. So just to remind you, cofactors and coenzymes, those are helpers. How do we tell the difference between a coenzyme helper and a cofactor helper? Does anyone remember? What's the difference? Yeah, one's organic, one's inorganic. Which one's organic? Coenzymes, right? Enzymes are organic, coenzymes are also organic, like vitamin and niacin. And then you got your cofactors, and cofactors are inorganic. So they're made of like zinc, iron, and potassium, copper, right? Those important minerals. Now, the enzyme part, so if the enzyme needs a cofactor or a coenzyme, but it's incomplete, we call it the APO enzyme, APO enzyme. Okay, so that's the protein part of the enzyme. A complete enzyme functioning and doing its job that requires a cofactor or coenzyme would include those coenzymes and cofactors. Okay, so you might see that term, so I just wanted to make sure you understood what that meant. And then again, like I said, many of them require a helper substance, right, to function properly. So that's what a cofactor is, right? Helps reaction, may participate in reaction by accepting or giving electrons to the reaction, but it's not used up itself. Okay, it's spit out and then it can be reused by another enzyme or APO enzyme. Last time we talked about inhibition, and I mentioned it to you, reversible and irreversible inhibition. I didn't really mention it to the first class, so I put it in the notes, but you guys, we chatted about this. Inhibition, reversible and irreversible. So reversible means that it can be undone. And if it can be undone, an enzymatic reaction is blocked, so it drops. But if it can be undone and the enzymatic reaction can happen, it might just happen at a lower state now. Instead of happening at this rate, it happened at this rate. Now, if it's irreversible and there's enough of the inhibitor, instead of functioning here or here, it could completely turn it off and shut it down, and then your rate of reaction would be 0. Okay, but you would need quite a bit. So you heard that Russian dude that got the Novichok in his water at his apartment or hotel room? Now, he didn't die. And likely he didn't die because he didn't get enough. So his rate of reaction that this thing was blocking, although it's probably irreversible, it brought it down to a really low enzymatic function, but it didn't shut it down. So he didn't get enough. He didn't ingest enough. If he would have ingested more, he probably would have never woken up in Germany, and he probably would be either brain dead or organ dead or just dead, right? So reversible binds but can be released. Irreversible binds and is permanent. Now, a good example of inhibition, irreversible, is this penicillin. Penicillin kills bacteria. So before penicillin and antibiotics, people used to die all the time from bacterial infections. You know, so if you had a little infection and a cut, your body either beat it or you died. And now we just give you some antibiotics, right? We can put antibiotic cream on it. If it's really bad, we can inject it into you and your body can circulate it. But before penicillin, we really had problems with antibiotics, or bacteria, sorry. And we didn't have very many antibiotics. And it does it by binding irreversibly to an enzyme that helps to make the cell walls of bacteria. So without cell walls, bacteria don't survive. So as it tries to divide, no cell wall, it divides, both of them die. So it's a very important discovery in treating infections. And we talked about other ones, right? Another one would be cyanide. So if you're a spy and you have a little pendant necklace with a little bit of cyanide in it, and you get caught, what's your job? Don't tell anyone anything. Take your cyanide, lay down. Right? Take your secrets with you. Okay, so that's a irreversible inhibitor of enzymatic reactions in the human body. There's other ones too. You've heard of people getting lead poisoning. It happened quite often when I was a kid because we get these toys and things made of lead. And some kids would put it in their mouths. But you didn't even have to put it in your mouth. You could just wear it on your wrist. So lead is really heavy. It's dense, and it feels like gold, especially if you color it yellow. So lots of toy jewelry was made out of lead. And then kids would wear it around their neck or their wrists, and even adults, if they wanted to pretend they're rich. But they would absorb the lead through their skin. Now, it's more problematic for youngsters because it really affects the nerve cells. And your brain is just a big pile of nerve cells. So as you absorb this lead or mercury or cadmium, adults, it could be bad, right? They could have some neurological disorders, some difficulty breathing and stuff. But for children, it could be cognitive disabilities, right? They could have really decreased IQs and motor function. In Japan, they have something called a Mitamaki disease. If Ms. Lehman, if you guys have Ms. Lehman last year, I'm not sure if Mr. Mayer or Sheldon showed it, but there's a video about how the Japanese like to eat dolphin and whale. And they like to, whales and dolphins are top carnivores, so they eat a lot of stuff from the ocean and they build up with mercury. And you can get Mitamaki disorder, which is a neurological disorder from eating too much fish with mercury in it. And it got its name because there used to be a factory in Japan that had all this production and manufacturing, and they would just throw their dirty water into the rivers and oceans. And the kids would be exposed to it, and they'd be born with these huge neurological disorders. And the city was called Mitamaki. And the factory, the company was sued, and they got in big trouble, but the damage was done, right? So these children born with birth defects and cognitive defects and everything like that. So that's mercury and heavy metals like cadmium and lead. So those work by non-competitive inhibition. So they attach to the protein somewhere else, and then the active site changes. Remember we talked about how important the active site was? So super duper important that the amino acid sequence was right. Super duper important that it folded correctly. Super duper important to have that active site perfectly fit, like a lock and key to the substrate. So it's non-competitive, they bind irreversibly, and that lead stays for a long time. Any questions about about inhibition? Okay. Now, a molecule that we would usually talk about if we had more time than just a quarter of the year, you're going home to do chapter 1 and chapter 2, and we usually do that as a class. It's kind of fortunate. To be honest, I'd love to teach it to you, but you guys would probably hate it because it takes all the way to Christmas break, and you're learning about biochem the whole time, and people are like, I signed up for anatomy, physiology, and we're just doing chemistry, and I don't want to do chemistry. So you might be happy to see that we did this. We're sending this home, and it doesn't count for too much. But it's an important base. But one molecule we would have spoke on, and you'll read about it, is something called adenosine triphosphate, ATP. The abbreviation is ATP. Now ATP is the molecule of energy store in the human body for most organisms. Okay. Now most people say, but Mr. J, isn't carbohydrates where we get our energy? Yeah, that's where we get our energy, but we have to convert it. We can't use it straight away. It's kind of like if I dug a hole into the ground and I struck oil, and I'd say, I'd yell, Eureka, we struck oil, and I don't need to buy gasoline ever again. And I just take that dirty black sludge and I just throw it in my car. And then guess what happens? I have to go buy a new car, right? Because that oil needs to be refined. The oil needs to be treated so that it's free of impurities and it's the right chemical, compound formula to burn cleanly in my combustion engine car. If I just throw in dirty oil, it doesn't work. Carbohydrates, the same thing. When we eat it, that's the thing that we use in a process called cellular respiration. You may remember that, right? Carbohydrates plus oxygen at a mitochondria turns it into energy and water, right? And carbon dioxide. What's the energy? ATP. ATP, I liken ATP to a battery. Okay, so ATP is a battery. So here it is. And most things nowadays have bars to tell you how fully charged they are. So usually it's like 4 or 5 bars. We'll pretend it's 3 bars. If it has 3 bars, it's fully charged. If you use it, it goes down to 2, and if you use it more, it goes down to 1. And if it gets down to 0, well, the battery gets thrown away. Nowadays, we have these rechargeable batteries. So it goes from 3 bars to 2 bars, and then what do? Yeah, you recharge it, or you run it down to 1, and then you recharge it back to 3, right? Well, ATP kind of works this way. Okay? ATP is really important. It's responsible for all the cellular chemical reactions in the body. And it actually it functions to control synthesis reactions, muscle contractions, active transport, which you'll cover by yourself, hopefully. It'll be okay. It's done at the mitochondria through a process called cellular respiration. And it requires ATP and glucose, and the byproducts, the waste products, right? So it requires 1, 2 to produce 1, 2, plus water. And it has 3 bars. The 3 bars are actually phosphates. Adenosine triphosphate. 3 phosphates. And the phosphate to phosphate bond is super high energy. So we use sugar with the help of mitochondria to put that phosphate on. And then it stores it. And then when we need it, it breaks the bond. And when it breaks the bond, it's like a firecracker. It releases energy. And so that energy can be used to heat up a chemical reaction, right? Because remember, in your body, 37 degrees, you stick your finger in there, it's not very warm. So we have this store of energy, and usually the energy is heat energy. And when we need it, we break these ATPs and it releases energy. So if you break the bond, it goes from ATP to ADP. So it goes from 3 bars down to 2 bars. And then your body, your mitochondria will say, oh, man, there's an ADP. Let's just charge it back up. We'll use some sugar and charge it back up to ATP. Sometimes you go from ATP, release some energy, to AMP, but then you can't go any further. So we have to recharge them using mitochondria again. Okay, and this is what ATP looks like, right there. So it's called ATP. A comes from the adenine, right? And then the T comes from 1, 2, 3 triphosphates. It's actually made of an adenine, a nucleotide, stuck to a ribose sugar, and 3 phosphates, ATP. And if I want energy for a chemical reaction, we will take this ATP, pop off that 1P, and there's a release of energy. Now, we can do that, but then we're going to run out of ATP. So this will go back to the mitochondria and be recharged using glucose, the carbohydrate glucose, through a whole bunch of steps. You guys will learn that in first year university, and you'll put that phosphate back on. If you run out of phosphates, your mitochondria doesn't work, you run out of ATP, you will die, right? You can't even run your base metabolic functions without ATP. You have to have it. Any questions about ATP? It's one of those ones that's in your nucleotide unit, right? Your DNA unit, RNA unit. So I thought we'd mention that, and it's really important as a molecule because it's your energy reserve unit molecule, right? Good. So ATP, it's required for metabolism. So there's your ATP. Break the bond to ADP and phosphate, energy is released. And then the mitochondria will put that P back on. And this is your usable form. That's the one that we can control, the ATP. That's the one we can control how the energy is being used. Okay? Another thing that we chatted about, but I kind of skipped with my first block, was the 2 arms of metabolism. Anabolic metabolism. It's got a funny name, anabolism too. Sounds like cannibalism, but anabolism. And then the other one, catabolic metabolism, it can be called catabolism, right? So you can kind of join them together instead of saying anabolic metabolism, join it, anabolism, catabolic metabolism, catabolism. We told you that anabolic metabolism, A stands for add, so we're building, and catabolic metabolism, that's really confusing, as to break it down. Okay? And the rate of these reactions are controlled by a hormone called thyroxine, and that's what we're going to talk about today. I mean, we're already there, right? So we're almost done. This is the last thing we have to chat about before this unit's over. Now, before we get there, who can remind me what is the name of the chemical reaction for putting stuff together, for the anabolic metabolism component? Dehydration synthesis, right? Yeah, synthesizing, and we're taking water out when we make the bonds, and you'll see that when you take a look at your lessons. And then what's the name of the chemical reaction for catabolic metabolism? Hydrolysis. Hydro meaning water. Water is going to be added to a bond to break it apart. Okay, it's kind of weird because you say, well, cutting it apart, so there should be pieces coming out. No, we actually have to add water to break it up. So thyroxine. Let's take a look at thyroxine. Thyroxine. Thyroxine is produced by a gland in your neck. Right here, actually, you can see it. Right, this is your trachea, your larynx, and then there's this fatty thing here. That's your thyroid gland. Now it's an endocrine gland. Endo means it ends up in your blood. It produces chemicals that end up in your blood. You're going to compare and contrast that with exocrine. Exocrine is juices or secretions that can leave the body. So they usually go into hollow bodies, like into your gut, right, into your stomach, into your duodenum. So they're going into an opening. They could exit, while endocrine goes into your blood. Okay, endo into your blood. So this is an endocrine gland because it sends chemicals into your blood. Now, its main role is to increase metabolic rate. So to burn more sugar, really, to burn more ATP. So what you end up doing is use up way more sugar and way more oxygen, so you have to breathe more. Why? To make more ATP, because you're using up more ATP. When you use up ATP, every time those bonds break, what kind of energy is released? Heat energy. So as a result, you get warmer as well. Okay? Now, this is also, thyroxine is also, it's anabolic as well. So, we would get elevated thyroxine in people that are growing, right? Because it's gonna do anabolic reactions and make more tissue, make more bone, make more muscle, and you would get taller and stuff like that. So we see variations for not only just exercise and stuff like that, but just normal day-to-day growth as well. It can be triggered by emotion, stress, temperature, exercise, and other hormones. The levels are controlled by negative feedback. Because in general, if you're a healthy adult, your thyroxine level is pretty flat. Now, if your temperature goes up, it's going to try to bring your temperature back down, and so your thyroxine levels might fluctuate as well. But it's got a homeostatic value, and it kind of wants to stay level. And how are things controlled to stay level in a human body? Negative feedback. Okay, it's always negative feedback if you're trying to be flat. So here's your larynx. There's your trachea. So this is your voice box. The glottis is the opening there, and you have that little flap called the epiglottis. This is your thyroid gland right here. Now you can have something called hyperthyroidism, and that's it makes you a little bit hyper. There's actually some people take thyroxine as a diet pill, so they take it orally, and then they burn off more sugar and ATP. Not sure if it's the safest thing to do. But some people, use it as a weight loss treatment. So if you're hyperthyroid, you would have too much thyroxine in you, and you'd be, more alert and all that stuff, more active. You could have hypothyroidism, where your thyroid doesn't work so well, and then you could be sleepy and tired, and your metabolic rate would be lower, so you might put on weight easier. Hyperthyroidism is associated often with a large thyroid, so your thyroid gets enlarged, and you get something called a goiter. Kind of looks like one of those puffy bird necks, right? And it's not uncommon I know people, my sister has hyperthyroid, so she had some treatment done to it to essentially eradicate it. You can have radiation treatment and kill it, and then you take oral supplements for your thyroxine and iodine and stuff like that. So another side effects is the hyper distension of your eyes. Your eyes poke out. Okay, so some characteristics of hyperthyroidism. So, like I said, there can be lots of triggers for it. Stress could be a trigger for it, exercise. Another trigger for it is temperature. Right? So if you get too cold or you get too hot, if you get too cold, you're standing outside, you're like, wow, it's really cold, I should have worn a jacket. Your body core temperature could drop. It's measured by your skin, obviously. And there's other parts of your body, like your eyeball can even measure your temperature a bit. And they'll send signals to your brain saying, you're way too cold, you need to warm up. And one of the things you can do, and I already said this, to warm up is you can start shivering. Your muscles can start contracting and they can use up ATP, because every time they break a bond of ATP, it's releasing heat energy and it can warm you up. So we can use cold. You get cold and you start feeling it. So a message is sent to your brain. So you have sensors on your skin, you got sensors in your eye, right? You got sensors all over your body, and they send a message to your hypothalamus, a part of your brain that says, hey, you should have worn a jacket, you're getting cold, we need to warm you up. And it says, okay, fine, I will warm you up. And it sends out a message, and the message is the form of a hormone, so it releases a chemical. Now, the message only needs to go to this fellow here, the pituitary gland, this little P-shaped part of your brain. But instead of just sending it like a message where I just go, hey, here's the message, you're welcome, it just yells it out. It drops it into your circulatory system. And the circulatory system carries it throughout your whole body. The message is called TSHRH, thyroid stimulating hormone releasing hormone. Thyroid stimulating hormone releasing hormone, TSHRH. That's it. So the cold, your brain, your hypothalamus says, okay, you're cold, so I'm going to release this chemical into the blood. And the blood travels around your body and it goes back to your pituitary gland. And your anterior pituitary gland releases another hormone. It goes, oh, I got your message. Thanks for yelling it out loud instead of just giving it to me on a piece of paper. But you yelled that we're too cold. Okay, fine. I will release a hormone called thyroid stimulating hormone. Okay, thyroid stimulating hormone. And that's dumped into your blood, so because both are endocrine. And then that message gets circulated all over your body and it arrives at your thyroid. And your thyroid says, oh, I got this message via the blood saying that I need to release a hormone to raise our temperature. And it releases something called thyroxine right there. And the thyroxine goes to the entirety of your body. It increases your metabolic rate, so it makes you burn more ATP. As a result, you need to burn sugar, right? Use sugar and oxygen at your mitochondria to make more ATP to replace the ATP you're using. And your body temperature should go up. And now if your body temperature should go up, do you want it to go shooting past 37? No. So when you start inching up, there's negative feedback. So the temperature feeds back to your hypothalamus and said, okay, the sensors are now saying the body temperature is okay, so you don't need to make any more thyroid stimulating hormone releasing hormone. And they go, fine, I'm not going to do it anymore. So your hypothalamus stops making it. But there's a second loop. Just the buildup of thyroxine itself will feed back to the anterior pituitary, the little P in your brain, to say you don't need to release any more TSH either. So it's a double feedback loop. And then your temperature will start dropping. And as your temperature drops, your body goes, hey, wait, we're getting cold again. And then guess what? These two feedbacks disappear. And then you release more TSHRH, which leads to more TSH, which leads to more thyroxine, which leads to more warm. And then feedback to cool you down again. Now, does it look like this in temperature? No, it looks like this in temperature. But when you step away from it, it looks like 37 degrees. But it could be like 36.95, and then 37. Oh, shoot, we're too warm. 37.02, and then it'll drop back down again. So it's just incremental little flickers around 37. And it's maintained by negative feedback. And this one is a really good example because there's two loops. The thyroxine negative feedbacks to your anterior pituitary, and the temperature is a negative feedback to your hypothalamus. Okay? Now, the anterior pituitary, this just before we end, this little P part of your brain is really neat because it actually is a circle, a sphere, but it's actually made of two different types of brain tissue. So we have the front side called the anterior side, and we got the posterior side, your bum side, towards your butt. So the back side. And this is another type of tissue, and this is one type of tissue. They are both endocrine. They both secrete hormones. But the thyroxine, the TSH, it comes from this front part, the anterior part. So that's pretty neat. It's actually two different types of brain tissue there. All right? So I think it just says, oh, look at that, negative feedback, and as a result, double negative feedback loop, metabolism slows, body temperature falls. So with this double feedback loop, hypothalamus stops producing chemicals, anterior pituitary stops producing hormones, therefore thyroid stops producing hormones, temperature drops. Okay? And then repeats over and over. And this is an ongoing cycle. Just circle, 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 over and over again. Thyroxine, any questions? Yeah. So there's your working one example of a negative feedback loop. We could have chosen blood pressure. We could have chosen heart rate. We could have chosen something completely different. We chose temperature and metabolism because we're talking about metabolism. And then when we do your heart, we do your breathing and all that stuff, we might talk about negative feedback specifically to those organ systems then.